Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Loop and Learn. We've been off for a few weeks. Happy New Year. I hope everyone is staying healthy and happy. Today we have an unusual event for the looping community, and yet I think this is really important. So I think you'll learn a lot. I think you'll be able to ask lots of questions, and we're ready to go. Today we have two folks from MannKind, which is the company that makes Afrezza, the inhalable insulin, and the only inhalable insulin on the market, actually. We have Michael Castagna, like lasagna, got it, CEO of MannKind, and Dr. Kevin Kaiserman, who's VP involved with medical aspects and regulatory and safety. I will do what we've always done, which is a disclaimer that the Loop app is a do-it-yourself closed-loop algorithm. And while it may seem obvious, please consult with your healthcare professional regarding your diabetes management. We are not the experts your healthcare professionals are. Understand that this project is highly experimental, is not FDA approved for therapy. Therefore, you take full responsibility for building and running the system, and you do so at your own risk. Want to also remind you all that we have a website that was lovingly curated by Mark Oldham. Lots of us are now working on it. It's pretty a substantial website that you'll want to take a look at. There's a wonderful section on starting Loop and how to troubleshoot things. That's where you'll see important announcements. You can sign up for a newsletter where you'll get the announcements as they come up, particularly if there's a critical issue. And there are lots of important discussions on there that would be valuable to loopers. So go check that out, bookmark it if you can. And I'm just gonna take you back to the introduction. So for our first presentation in our speaker series for 2021, which we all hope is going to be a wildly better year, this topic is not specific to looping, but it's a unique tool for blood sugar management. MannKind Corporation was founded by the late Dr. Al Mann, who was absolutely instrumental in extraordinary medical device development. You can look him up, you will know the devices he worked on. And MannKind is the maker of Afrezza. And in my personal opinion, it can be a very useful tool in the diabetes management toolbox, whether you use it often or as needed to deal with very stubborn highs that can come from illness, faulty cannulas, pumps not working right, undercounting carbs, stress with your spouse, stress with school. It's a powerful adjunct to anything you're already using. Mike Castagna is CEO with 20 years of experience in healthcare, pharmaceutical, biotech, and specialty pharmacy industries. He is truly a powerhouse of information, and since we both attended the same grad school, I think that accounts for a lot. Dr. Kevin Kaiserman recently joined MannKind as VP of Medical Affairs and Safety, formerly Medical Director of the Clinical Diabetes Program at Children's Hospital LA and USC Keck School of Medicine. He's board certified in pediatric endocrinology. He's active with Camp Conrad Chinook and is involved with diabetes educational and camping services. So he's way into camping. I am now going to turn this over. Mike, take it away, and please, thank you so much for both of you for being here on your Sunday afternoon.
No problem.
What I should also mention is that we'll take all questions that you have, put them in the chat. Any one of these admins will grab them and we'll deliver them to Mike and Dr. K as we go along. So there you go.
And I want to say thank you for all those who posted some comments and questions. Joanne and Sarah sent those, so I put a slide in here specifically that we will address those directly. And really, thank you, Joanne, for inviting me and Kevin to participate this evening. I have more slides and content and data than we'll ever need, but I kind of drew a journey out of talking about diabetes and insulin. And all of you are better experts than I. You live with the disease 24/7. Diabetes is personal for me. It impacts my family and it's something I have an intense passion around. My background's in pharmacy. I went to pharmacy school, was going to be a physician like Kevin, and I decided that was a very expensive proposition and went back in and built a career in the pharmaceutical industry and spent a lot of time trying to drive change in different disease states. So I worked in HIV, helped build the first one pill once a day regimen there, and then went on and did biosimilars. And when I was at Amgen, I brought the Omnipod over to Neulasta. So all the ads that you see for Onpro and that whole thing was a lot of my work back at Amgen. And it's always funny when people say, "Oh, I'm so sorry you have cancer," and they know I have diabetes. And so, so sorry for those interactions that some of you may have from all that work. But it's really changed people with cancer, including my brother's going through treatment right now and wearing the device. So, our founder, as Joanne said, is Al Mann. If you don't know Al Mann, he was a visionary in aerospace technology and biopharmaceuticals. He started over 17 companies, and the one that most of you know personally in diabetes is really around MiniMed, which became Medtronic Diabetes. And almost 23 years ago, Al started investing in what became Afrezza's technology. So he put three companies together, ultimately that he owned in 1991, and formed what is today known as MannKind. Mannkind is obviously Al Mann's last name, and kind because he's been kind to society and helped millions of patients. And we wouldn't be here today without Al Mann. As you may or may not know, there's been over $5 billion spent and probably almost 10,000 people studied in inhaled insulin between us and Pfizer and Sanofi. And I don't expect anyone else to be spending that kind of money to bring these types of newer insulins to market because it is so expensive. It took us over 20 years, 70 trials, and a lot of money and a lot of failure along the way, unfortunately. But we finally got there. And I think what you'll understand today is why this was so hard and why when you're changing the treatment paradigm of inhaled insulin versus injectable insulin that's been used for well over 100 years successfully, this has been a long endeavor for Al Mann. And without his generosity and patience and futuristic vision, there's no way we would have gotten through all those tough times over the years. So what makes it hard is some of the questions you guys had, which is, how does the dosing work? Why is it different? How do I cover my meal? And so I'll walk you through a little bit of that journey, what we've learned and what studies I've done over the last couple of years. And as Kevin just joined us. So who is MannKind? Well, MannKind is a platform-based company. We have a pipeline of about 7 assets. Diabetes was our first FDA-approved asset. We make Afrezza here in the U.S. in Danbury, Connecticut. And our corporate offices where I'm at here is in Westlake Village, California. We are, we'll be announcing probably tomorrow, I guess Monday. United Therapeutics will be announcing kind of where Afrezza is going, not Afrezza, but our first pipeline asset that'll be hopefully filing later this year with the FDA called treprostinil. So we're taking another pulmonary disease and applying our technology to get deep lung penetration and treat an orphan lung condition that impacts about 30,000 patients here in the U.S. And then we also have another partnership with a company called Receptor Life Sciences, and that's in the cannabinoid space. And we'll have many, many others that you'll continue to hear about. So the company itself is really using this technology to help in other diseases, and that's really important. Afrezza is only approved here in the U.S. and Brazil. That was one of the questions I saw come in. We have recently expecting to start a trial any day if it hasn't started in India, and we are expected to file this year in Australia. So a lot of other markets will come on over the next couple of years. And one of the things I'll talk about today is BluHale innovation, and that's this little device here that goes on the back of the inhaler and how we're starting to adapt to Bluetooth technology that we think is important. I think I mentioned most of this, but when people ask me, a lot of docs, you would believe your own providers, I jokingly say they don't even know that Afrezza was studied in head-to-head trials, right? So we've studied this in many, many trials in over 3,000 patients and 70 trials. We are a publicly traded company. So to some of your looping disclaimers, I will say, this is really a discussion tonight. I'm not trying to promote Afrezza. I'm trying to educate and inform society that it's inhaled insulin is an option for many of you. And there's also risks and benefits to every drug, and always work with your doctor to find the appropriate treatment. We will talk about some of the looping data that was done with Afrezza, just because I thought that was relevant to this audience. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of those studies and the results that we've seen as well. But again, that's off-label. It's not something that we actively promote or Kevin and I are talking about how do we study this. So Afrezza is indicated for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. You take it at the start of a meal. You don't have to guess when your food's going to arrive. It's been demonstrated to improve A1C and time in range. And it comes in 4, 8, and 12, which I know in this group will be a major topic. And so I look forward to that discussion and starting to talk about that. Sorry, I got to automated light timer here. Okay. And I just realized I was looking at myself. Okay. So there is a black box warning for acute bronchospasm, and that's mainly because of the way we studied it. People that had asthma, we studied that, and you know, you don't want a bronchospasm, but it's a rare side effect that happens. It usually happens in the first dose. And chronic lung disease. So if you have asthma, COPD, we're definitely not the drug, or active smoking. Contraindications are hypoglycemia, using it during DKA. Those are some of the areas we strive away from. I will talk more about the safety of the product overall later in the deck. Here's what society looks at is, you know, we spend over $20 billion a year on insulin and devices, and yet 80% of people are not at goal. Now, I know in this group, we're dealing with the 1% of the 1% success rates, and you guys are doing everything you can to manage your disease and be in control. But this data is from the T1D Exchange Registry, which is roughly the top 60 centers in the US. And here you can see, you know, despite adoption of CGM and insulin pumps, and this data is even greater today, over the last decade, we've seen A1Cs actually go up, and that's really driven by pediatrics. And so therefore you see about 8 out of 10 people are not at goal on injectable insulin here in the US. And we, you know, MannKind, what we stand for is really postprandial control. And that's what we look at, is a lot of this data has been around a long time, that if you're not, you know, the closer you get to a level 7, the more important post mealtime control is. And that's where we focus on with Afrezza, is really effective mealtime control. And Kevin and I just finished up an abstract for ADA looking at daytime time and range, where we think Afrezza has obviously the most impact. And if I had to ask many of you and say, what is the characteristics of an ideal insulin? I think this is what people would say. Mimics physiologic insulin. I take it, I don't think about it. Improves my time and range, has less hypoglycemia, doesn't cause me to gain as much weight, reduces stacking, and discreet and convenient. We know 1 out of 5 insulin doses is missed mainly at lunchtime because people don't want to stop and inject or expose themselves in front of their colleagues for whatever reason. But this is a major issue. If 1 out of 5 doses are missed, you're missing 20% of your insulin dose. You're just not going to be able to get that tight control. So people ask me, you know, Afrezza, I'm worried about the safety. And I jokingly say we make Afrezza in FDKP is our secret ingredient there that we've certified with the FDA. FDKP is 100% excreted in your urine and feces. And so that's not absorbed in the body, doesn't cross the placenta if you're pregnant. We take human insulin, what the world knows is human insulin in the body. So the body likes human insulin. And water, which I can attest is purified very well because we spend a lot of money making that water crystal clean. So there's human insulin, water, and FDKP. So those are the 3 ingredients in Afrezza. It is not a modified insulin. So when you think about analog insulins, those are modified insulins, right? And so this is human insulin, and we obviously make it with a partner down in France. So when we take Afrezza, we freeze dry it, and almost, if anyone's heard of Dippin' Dots, we basically have a large Dippin' Dot machine in Danbury, Connecticut, and we freeze dry it at an acidic pH. And then as soon as you inhale, your lungs are a basic pH, and your lungs are half the size of a tennis court. So, you know, it's one of the underutilized delivery mechanisms for any drug. And we were one of the first drugs to get approved that was not treating a lung disease. So think about being the first. It took a long time and a lot of work. But we get a really fast absorption, just like you get oxygen in your lungs. You don't feel about it, you don't think about it, it just goes in and you breathe every day and get oxygen. Afrezza gives you almost like an IV-like insulin response. So as soon as you inhale, it immediately gets into your portal system and your circulation and starts working right away. And that is because what people don't realize, it's scientifically different. When we bind Afrezza into the FDKP in solution, it's in a monomeric form. So when you look over here, Afrezza is already monomeric, and so when you think about injectable mealtime insulin or basal insulins, they're in hexamer, multi-hexamers, and have to be broken down. And that just takes 30 to 45 minutes. You pick your insulin; it doesn't really matter. We don't really take sides, and you know, is Fios faster? Is Lyumjev faster? Is Novolog faster? I will just say, look at the data, look at the outcomes. They're not much different between each other. Meaning, you know, the FDA shows you they've got roughly the same A1C, the same weight gain, the same, reductions, and there's not a huge difference. And you know, a lot of these are new innovations or, you know, simple modifications, but they're meant to really avoid biosimilar competition, and they're not making dramatic improvements in human outcomes. And I think that's something that we focus on, is how can we really change insulin dosing and give you better mealtime control? And what we didn't know when we developed Afrezza was, we underdosed in our clinical trials, and those were the pivotal trials we used. We're stuck with that data. And a lot of the data we've been generating the last couple of years is showing you how do you properly dose Afrezza. Inhaled insulin is not the same as injectable insulin. It is different, it acts different, it behaves different in the body and the speed of action. So that's something we'll talk about today. So let's look at physiologic insulin. And when you really look at this blue shaded area, generally you want enough insulin to cover your meal. And the blue shaded area is what a natural healthy pancreas looks like for your mealtime response. And you see Afrezza, whether this is a 12, but if I showed you a 4-unit and 8-unit, it just mirrors each other. And I'll show you that data shortly. But you really want insulin when your food appears, and you want the insulin to go away when your food disappears. And that's generally the struggle that everyone in living with diabetes has, is there's just a mismatch between the peak of your injectable insulin and your peak of, what happens naturally in the body. So that mismatch is always why you're going high and low and trying to catch yourself because of the timing of insulin. Sorry, I don't know why I did that. And so that's really, when your food clears and you're, feeling like you're safe, and then all of a sudden your sugars just drop 2-3 hours later after you took your dose. A lot of that is because your, food has cleared and there's nothing there to catch this. And so that's really where we look at the difference with Afrezza and injectable insulin, is this tail of insulin causing latent hypoglycemia. And our data will continue to show that. The other thing you notice here is roughly a similar glucose effect. We say is 8 to 12. So the reason I show this is we're going to talk about the dosing. That's about a 1.5 ratio. So think about pulmonary insulin. You definitely need more insulin to get the same effect than you do injectable insulin. They're not 1-to-1. And so when I get the question about 2 units of insulin, I'll be the first one to tell you, if you take 1 unit of insulin per meal, then we may not be the right drug for you, right? But very few patients are taking 1 unit of insulin per meal. And that's when we look at how to help the majority. I see a bunch of questions coming in. I don't know, or comments. Should I stop for those, Joanne? Or?
You may want to speak to the tail again, Mike, because that's an important issue.
Okay.
They were asking about the tail of the insulin, just to go walk them through that again.
So when you inject insulin, and you could pick any subcutaneous insulin, these guys don't dramatic differently. You can read all the marketing literature; they'll tell you something. But you really look here, and this is injectable insulin. It takes about 45 minutes for it to kick in, and then its peak effect is about 2 hours later, and then starts to clear out over the next 4 to 6 hours. And this is true. You can pull the package insert of Fiasp and Novolog. I'm not here to pick on any one of them. When you look at Afrezza, it's almost immediate effect. As soon as you inhale, it's monomeric. It starts acting. You get a really quick uptake, and then it comes out of the body within 60 to 90 minutes. So pretty much in the first hour, Afrezza's done its effect. So when people say, "Can I dose again?" I'll show you data where we dosed again in 1 hour. So that's really what we say. Your risk of stacking when you take a second dose beyond 1 hour is very low. I'll never say anything's impossible. We're all human and things happen. But Afrezza's on its way down after 1 hour, and so you just don't have this 4 to 6 hour tail. And this is what a lot of you struggle with, is you give a second dose on top of your first dose because you're just not getting the effect you want. And then you got 2 insulins, so you're pushing this curve out even further. So what you think is going to work 4 to 6 hours is now going to work 5 to 7 hours. And then you're probably heading into your next meal and taking your next dose, and you just go over the cycle every day. So that shortened tail gives you a little bit more control as opposed to your insulin controlling you. Because in an hour, if you're still high, you can choose to take another dose. If you're not high enough, if you're somewhere in good time and range, you can just watch it. And that's the beauty. It starts working in 10, 15 minutes. You'll see it on 3 dots on a Dexcom, what's happening. And so that's really the beauty of this product. You're really at the mercy of your insulin every day, every minute. And I'll keep going. Just interrupt me, Joanne, if there's any questions you think I should be addressing.
Gotcha.
And then, I'll do is I have a section come up where I talk about the questions you guys gave me, and we can talk there. This is healthy volunteers. So, even my own knowledge was limited when I started here 4 years ago on this journey, is that I thought breakfast, lunch, and dinner had different rates of glucose appearance and disappearance. And the fact is, your body just may release more insulin, right, to cover it in healthy people. And that's what you're trying to do when you have this insulin defect. Is breakfast, lunch, or dinner, your rate of appearance is the first 30 minutes, similar to what you see in Afrezza. And then it's pretty much out of the body by 2 hours. And this is where you see the disappearance, right? 2 hours, you're coming back down. And then your endogenous glucose suppression, which is really hitting your liver. You want to tell your liver to tell the body to stop releasing sugar. And the faster you can suppress that, the less sugar you have in your body running around. And if I showed you the Afrezza data here, we also shut down the endogenous glucose production faster than injectable insulin by about 45 minutes. So, that's another benefit that you get. And the reason that's important is you'll see we always consistently have lower fastings in our trials in type 1s. And we think part of it is because you are getting some of this EGP suppression. And yes, Ben, that is because it's inhaled and it's monomeric more than the fact that it's inhaled. The monomeric aspects allows it to quickly hit the liver and shut down that EGP. Okay. All right, so here were some of the questions I got that I thought was a good pause to take, and then we can probably go through some other questions, and then I have other data we can go into. So when you cough, so when you inhale Afrezza, right, it's a 2-second inhalation. So that's my dose, right? I'm done. And so a lot of times you may get a cough, and if you get a cough, it would happen just now. That's what the cough would feel like. But I'm going to show you something in a second called BluHale, and that is something we're launching here that will ultimately turn my Bluetooth on. That will ultimately show you proper inhalation in your doctor's office. So if you're worried, am I getting proper inhalation? This will help you see that. But if you inhale for that quickly, the powder is already in your lungs. It's out of the cartridge in a half a second, and it's breath activated. So you can't really fool the device, right? For that, say. And some people I know go, I only got a half a unit. No, you didn't. Trust me, you got all the units in your lungs. The reason you say hold for 10 seconds is you want that to get a very deep lung penetration. One of my buddies, I see Damon Dash on Instagram all the time, and he does it so fast. I'm like, Damon, you got to go a little bit longer. He's like, it works. And I'm like, okay, it may work for you, but you're teaching everyone else the wrong way. And so I always tell people, inhale for about 2 seconds, hold your breath. And can you, let me see okay. So let me find my little camera. Here it is. Let's see if this works. Okay. So this is BluHale Pro, and I'm going to begin use. And so you can see here, if I'm holding my inhaler steady, if I turn it upside down, it tells me I'm dumping out my insulin. And so you want to hold it straight and level. And then proper inhalation technique, you'll see right here. Let me see. I'll click to start. Forgot the start button. And so you can see if you do it wrong, I cut off the corner there, so it's a little red. But I got most of my dose, so I'm not too worried. And I'll just show you good proper inhalation technique. It turns green. So that's what a good, so you can hear the whistle. You don't have to inhale really, really strong. So you'll see some people go, and you really don't have to do that. You see how you get this real fast effect that actually has a resistance mechanism in the inhaler that tries to slow down the powder. Because think about if you're driving a car 90 miles an hour and you try to turn a corner, and your ventricles in your lungs are they're like a tree branches, right? They go deep and complex. If you were turning the corner in a car 90 miles an hour, you would crash into a tree. Or a telephone pole, hopefully not. But that's what happens when you take an Advair or the typical devices you see out there. They just throw a bunch of powder. It gets stuck in your teeth, your throat, the device, and you just hope some of it gets into the lungs. Our technology was designed to really slow down the powder, have like a fine-tuned mist go down your throat. You don't lose a lot of the drug. You lose some of it, but in most devices, you lose about 70–80% of the powder on the way down to the lungs. In our device, you keep roughly the opposite, 60–70% of the powder is getting into the where you want it to be. So therefore, you need less drug on our technology platform with other things we're working on. Insulin's a little different because the injectable insulin and the inhaled insulin just work differently. Their mechanism of actions are different in terms of timing and onset and offset. So people always get confused. Well, is 4 units 1-to-1? And I'll be the first one to tell you no. When we designed it, it was designed as 3, 6, and 9, and the FDA rounded this up to 4, 8, and 12, and we were stuck with that. And so automatically when we were converting patients over, we're converting them at a lower dose than ideal, and that's why we'll talk about it's about a 1.5-to-2 ratio. We think is important. So that just talks about the cough, and I just want you to see visually how that feels and how it sounds, and I'll do it once again for those that have used it. You kind of can hear it again. Where is it going? So you can see what that's like. Okay, so that's what's coming, and I'll talk more about BluHale in a second, because what you'll be excited about is we can now detect what color cartridge you took and tell you when you took it on your CGM. And so that's coming, and that's exciting, and that's something we're working towards this year. I know Kevin's super excited about that.
Mike,
So that,
quick question. If you really did only want less than 4 units, could you do a quick inhale and have any idea that you've done half?
no, because if you do a quick inhale, you're just not getting the deep lung penetration that you want. It's not that you're getting less units, you're just getting an ineffective dose. And so, it's, and we'll talk about the 2 unit in a second. We'll probably do a study to put some of the rumors to bed, or we'll prove ourselves wrong, but we'll talk about the pediatrics and what we've learned there. But I want to comment, because sometimes people, especially you get the 8 and 12 units of inhalation per session, you may cough and see a little bit of white powder come out. That's the stuff that hit the back of your throat. Don't stress out about that. That you didn't lose your dose, you didn't get a missed dose, you got all your lung. It's all built into the device. There is loss, mechanical loss, but it's nowhere near what you get with other devices. So that's all built into the inhalation patterns that we've reproduced over and over and over. And so, don't worry, is my whole point to you. Drink a glass of water before and after. That helps mitigate some of the cough. If you're having something, someone said, "Oh, I'm worried about washing away the insulin." Believe me, you can't wash away the insulin. It's already down there. And so that's a lot of the tricks and tips there I'll give you on the cough section of the product. And if you do have any coughs, generally they're mild to moderate. They don't, less than 3% of people discontinue because of cough, but they go away within 30 days for the most part. 97% of people do not have cough after 30 days. And so that's really something to just set yourself mentally, if like just your body gets used to it, you get used to it. And, within your first refill, you'll be fine. So if it's really a bad cough, obviously don't keep pushing yourself. But if it's just a little bit of annoying cough, usually drink some water and it'll take care of itself. But I don't want to minimize it. That's the number one difference between us and injectable insulin. You put pumps in, you get site occlusions and other problems. We cough. So everything's got an Achilles heel is the bottom line.
So, Mike, a quick question about that. Sometimes when I inhale, I immediately cough and I see puff of stuff go out. So have I gotten less insulin, or is it already in?
It's already in. You can't come out once it's down your lungs. So that's what hits the back of your throat. When you cough, you're coughing the powder that hit the back of your throat. So we don't stress over that, because I've done it myself. I've seen it. So
there's also a little bit of concern that you've taken a whole bunch of insulin that you haven't eaten. I assume that's a dummy inhaler.
Me? Oh, I've taken, I've sometimes taken an accident without eating, but right now that's a dummy one I already used a few weeks ago. So, but yeah, I was on the news once and I took a 12 unit with nothing around me. That wasn't fun, but I was fine, thank God. So when will we come out with the smaller dose? And that's something, we'll talk about in a second. I won't answer, we were looking at our PED study saying if kids need 2 units, then that's one reason to think about it. But again, a 2 unit is roughly a 1 unit injectable, and very few patients are taking 1 unit injectable per meal. Now, in the looping world, that may be a different scenario. We're really trying to just tap it off a little bit and give a little bit of a thing, a little bit of dose. And one of the things I see people do on their pumps, especially when they say, "Mike, I need a 2 unit," and I always ask, "Are you on a pump?" And they go, "How did you know that?" And I say, because that's the predominant people that ask me for 2 units, because a lot of times what happens is you're really impatient with the activity of your injectable insulin, your bolus, and so you take a dose of Afrezza to get your high down, and Afrezza does this job in the first hour, and then 2 hours later your injectable insulin kicks in, and all of a sudden you're dropping low. Well, that had nothing to do with Afrezza. That was the bolus that you took 2 hours ago, finally catching up to the sugar. That's no longer, you have no more food and sugar left in the body, so you drop. And that's a lot of what we've seen. And so we went into the children down to 8 years old, and Kevin can tell you, he looked at the data. We saw very few kids. They were going higher than 8s and 12s as opposed to 4 was too much. And so that's one area of data we had in children to see where we are with 8 and 9 year olds. So we're working on a study, Kevin and I, to look at a 2 unit dose and saying, how do you standardize this? And how would you show, to me, a 2 unit works if you're taking a snack and you need to cover your sugars for 10 minutes. Like that's about what a 2 unit's going to do. And very few people are looking for 10-minute coverage of insulin. You're looking for a meal. And so that's something that we don't have an exact answer to, but I will share with you the integrated CGM data and looping data that we do have in a few minutes. And when it comes to the calculation of a dose of insulin, I think we over project our accuracy of dosing. So when you think about counting carbs, people are off by 50% one way or another, even the best of us. When you think about timing a 6-hour dose of insulin and a tail that's out there for 4 to 6 hours, that's really hard to do. I don't know what I'm going to be doing 2 hours from now rather than 6 hours. And so that's a big complication. The angle of injection, the old, how many days old is your site? All those things increase absorption or slow absorption, your stress levels. There are so many factors that go into it, to your dosing, that, that accuracy is not as accurate as we all think. And that's why I just kind of say, we're really trying to just get close enough to the meal that you're not putting yourself in harm's way, but high enough to make sure you're covering your meal. And that's always the balance and the seesaw effect. As you guys know, the number one thing you worry about is hypoglycemia. And that's something we're going to talk about. Afrezza has a very different profile on hypoglycemia. And that's why you can push your dose a little bit harder, because it's not going to sneak up on you as much in the 4 to 6 hours. It's pretty much in the first hour when your food's there. We've had people take it because they're so used to waiting for the injectable, and they go low. And I said, no, you got to take it when your food arrives. Don't take it a half hour in advance. And then life is unpredictable, right? Some of us have kids. Some of us are running around. You're going to have one glass of wine versus 2. You just don't know your life every day. And so that unpredictability, we're all human, and that's what you guys work so hard for. And so we know it's a 24/7 disease, and it's stressful, and it's burnout and everything else. And so what I tell someone is like, hey, you guys you're the 1% of the 1% in my mind. And, if you ever get burned out and tired, just think about basal insulin once a day and Afrezza and try it. You can always go back to the loops, and you can always go back to your pumps. There's nothing stopping you, but I'm getting a lot of New Year's A1Cs from my friends and patients saying, hey, 5.7, 6.2. And I've been asking them, because I knew this talk was coming up. I'm like, are you using it on a pump or by itself? And they're all like, no, just Afrezza and a basal, and some of them switch Tresiba and Trajeo, but it's possible to control your sugar with just one shot a day and using this for mealtime. We'll talk about integrating it into pumps and what we're trying to think about there. I'm going to keep going down the list of questions I got here. We are instructed to hold our breath for 10 seconds. Can speaking, swallowing, etc. affect the time of dose? No. We're really meant to hold your breath and not talk, because you're trying to just let that powder flow deeply. But it's pretty much in there. We'll never say never, but try to just hold your breath for a few seconds and let the insulin get deep in there. One of the unique things about Afrezza is it goes through the lungs into the blood, just like oxygen. When you think about the older inhaled insulin Exubera that was on the market over a decade ago, that was a sugar-based formulation called mannitol. It sat in the lungs, it absorbed over time. And the PK/PD, the pharmacokinetics of that product, looked very similar to injectable insulin. There was no clinical difference in Exubera. Afrezza is completely different than Exubera, and that's something to know. We don't sit in the lungs for hours. It's pretty much not there, within a day or 12 hours later when you look. Does insurance cover it? Yes. I'll talk about that in a second. Can kids use Afrezza? We are going into children. Hopefully we have an FDA meeting coming up in a few weeks. And if that all goes well, we hopefully will be starting the pediatric trial later this year. And we'll go as fast as we can to get that to children and study that head-to-head against the standard of care. I'm worried about the safety and the lung concerns. And, what I can tell you on this one is, we've studied Afrezza head-to-head in trials. It does not sit in the lungs. It does not absorb through the lungs over time. The lungs are just like your skin. You're poking a hole in your skin. You're putting the insulin in your lung and getting into the blood. We have not seen any data. It's been on the market over 5 years. We haven't seen any major post-marketing concerns. The number one adverse event is lack of effect, meaning people don't dose it enough, which is why one of our concerns is bringing a 2-unit cartridge, which actually cause that to happen even more, or cough. Those are the 2 biggest side effects that we get calls on. If I was sitting at another company, I'm sure I'd be seeing more hypoglycemia and things like that. So our adverse event profile is very different than injectable insulin. And so that's just the nature of our product. We've been on the market for a while. We have over 3,000 prescribers and about 7,000 patients now taking Afrezza in the US. And we're growing every quarter. So that continues to show the safety and efficacy. And there's a concern because there was a scare of insulin in the lungs from Exubera and maybe back in the 90s with basal insulin. And all I can tell you is, the majority of the cases of cancer that happened on inhaled insulin were all in smokers. And we don't recommend to use Afrezza in smokers. So we're not seeing a ton of things worried in non-smokers. And, 1 in 10,000 cases, I can never study this in a big enough population to show you a bigger safety concern. So we'll continue to work with the FDA. We have gotten rid of our REMS program, our risk management program. We tell you need a lung function test. And the only reason you need a lung function test is we're trying to make sure you don't have asthma or bronchospasm. And so you just take this little handheld device that is here. You inhale, you exhale in 1 second, and it's your forced expiratory volume. So if your doctors are sending you off for these $1,000 tests, that is not the intent of an FEV1. We give these devices away for free to patients if they need them directly for telemedicine reasons. You can email me. You'll have my email in a second. We'll send you one. And you can get Afrezza through getafrezza.com. So I meant to put that in the next slide in a second. But we now have a telemedicine with UpScript, so you can just go in there for $45 visit and get a prescription for Afrezza. And if there's a PA needed, we'll work through our reimbursement hub. So that's the lung function test. Why don't I stop there? And I see there's a bunch of chat room questions. So is there anything there we should be talking about?
Let me give you one question having to do with it came up a couple of days ago that a user said she started to see that she lost effect over time, that it was less effective. And I don't know how you determine that necessarily, but do you become acclimated to it somehow?
No, I mean, what we've seen in the trials, right, is your dose goes up over time, especially over the 12 weeks where you could change your dose. It went up about 50% from, if you were on 30 units, I think we saw you get to about 36 units. So versus injectable, anytime you're in a clinical trial, as you get better control, you need more insulin. And I think people don't realize where you come from and where you go in terms of how much better control you may have, how much less variability you may have. But if your A1C is going from an 8 to a 6, you're going to need more insulin. And so that's part of the challenge I think sometimes people see as well as taking a 4 for this meal. Now I need 8. Well, maybe you're just having better control, right? But in general, we test the cartridges. We've had people send them back when they tell us this. We've never had a recall. We've never had a batch-to-batch issue, knock on wood. So, generally a 4 is a 4, and 8 is an 8. It doesn't stop working. But I know just like insulin, sometimes your sites are clogged and you're like, what's happening? And you test it, and then the next day you're fine. I mean, hormones have a huge role in life. Stress has a huge role in life, and you could have gastric pheresis. So all kinds of things, as you guys know, you're dealing with. But in general, as you get better control, you will need more insulin, and that's what we've seen in our trials. That you go from, about 12 units a meal, 12 to 20 units a meal is what you're typically going to get, depending if you're type 1 or type 2. So that's what we saw in our type 1 study. It was about 12 units a meal on average.
So that just brought up two questions. For slow gastric emptying, which a lot of people developed after 20 years, is this tricky to use, or do you split a dose or take it later?
Yeah, so we've not done a study on gastroparesis, just to be clear, but what we hear from our patients on there, I know a surgeon, for example, who uses it, and he suffers from that, and he waits for his CGM to pop, and then once the sugars pop, he takes his Afrezza and just waits. That's typically what I hear people doing, and that's the beauty of this. It works pretty quickly, so you can not have to. You take a lot of that guesswork out.
Okay, and then a question did come up. Some people in the diabetes community have some impairment of vision and have difficulty distinguishing between the 4 unit and the 8 unit. They're very close in color. I don't know what the 12 is because I've never used it. Any option that you'll change colors?
No, I think that's a hard one. There's limited colors to pick from with the FDA. You can't have black ink in your color selection because black ink causes cancer, apparently, which I never knew until I took this job. And so then you have a limited color selection, and then we're launching other drugs that have other color cartridges. The 12 is yellow, so you'll definitely know a 12 versus a 4 and an 8. But we've had blind people take Afrezza, and one of the things they do is they just only carry 4 units. To avoid any mix-up, right, in that scenario. So they know if they take 2 puffs, it's 8, or 3 puffs is 12. So if you really have a difficult time, I think that's something to keep in mind. We've studied the blues and greens in colorblind, and they've passed fine in the colorblind test. So there's a lot of testing that goes into the color selection, and we didn't ever have any issues in all the development. But I know if you're in the dark, yeah, but I also joke, if you're in the dark trying to inject, you're also not going to be able to see. My lights just went out here. What a 4 or an 8 look, 1 unit, 1.5 unit look like on a pen. So that's also important.
Okay, then the question about storage. I know I read an article that you said you could keep Afrezza in the freezer, and I asked one of your reps, and he goes, "I didn't know that." I said, "Your CEO said." But the question is, how long can a 3-pack hang out in your desk or in your purse, which if you carry one, or how does it really need to be refrigerated? How long does it need to stay out before you use it?
Yep. So give me a second. Let's see if I have a package here. Yes, I may be quoted as saying you can. Sorry, I dropped my microphone. I do have it here. Okay. So
Oh. Did we just lose Mike?
Okay, y'all watch for him to come back.
Hang on.
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. I hit the button on my AirPod and it came off. Am I still clear like I was?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Not seeing you, but we do have your screen, your slides still up.
Okay, hold on. You can. Now you can see me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So sorry about that. I clicked off by accident. So on the packaging, I may be quoted that we do freeze Afrezza before we put it in the cartridges sometimes. So that's one way to stop stability from declining. And so, even we've looked at like shipping in terms of freezing it before we ship it to minimize cost of shipping. So that really does keep it stable. But so I always tell people you have like a 6-month supply, store it there, but there's expiration dating on it and we can never go beyond that. So when you get Afrezza, it comes in this little silver foil overwrap. And so when you take this out of the fridge, this is good for 30 days, just like this. And then the way we've built it, so that when you open it, now you have this strip and you should take, this is good for 10 days. And so generally, if you're taking 1 meal per day, this will be less than, 5 days max. So you got twice as much time to use this. Then you're meant to this could be your daily dose. If you just took 4s or 8s with you, 3 cartridges should get you through a day, unless you're taking 4 units nonstop, which I know some people do. And then you just push it out of the bottom, and then you get the 4 unit that way. So once this thing is pierced, this little thing, this is 3 days. So that's good at room temperature for 3 days. But in general, we know it's stable. It's a dry powder, but the degradation characteristics of insulin are there, just like anything. So if you leave insulin out in the sun and it does degrade, powder I'm sure is a little bit more stable versus a liquid biologic. But that is how it's meant. It's designed so that as you go from each breakdown of the packaging, you're using it in a time frame that you wouldn't have any expiring on you. Okay.
I know we tend to think we could keep a vial of insulin, liquid insulin, out of the refrigerator for 30 days. And some have it in our little go bags longer. Someone said in Houston, she leaves it in her car and hasn't noticed any, even in the summertime. So
as a CEO of the company, I can't go against the FDA recommendations and the stability, but I would tell you there's plenty of videos on YouTube. I've seen people leave it in their cars, the outbacks of Australia, and show that it's stable, so it's a very stable product. It's not really going to just stop working immediately. I can tell you that, but we do have FDA guidelines I try to stay within, but just wanted to break it down with the packaging.
We hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me talk about reimbursement, because I know that's a big question I saw and I hear and I see on the internet. There's a Facebook support group with over 1,000 patients there. So anytime you have a question on Afrezza, I love when I see our patients help other patients. It's great. And there's just a great community of support. 96% of people today are not aware inhaled insulin is an option that take insulin. And that's just mind boggling to me. So that's something we ask, I do this webinar and other things because I want to spread the word. We got to start making people aware of their choices and asking the if you're not in control, there's alternatives, right? And that's really my mission in life, is to help people get in control. And if you're in great control, you got to be happy and not going in severe lows and things like that. So on the reimbursement, we just recently launched something this past year called Afrezza Assist. And so your doctor can e-prescribe a prescription here, and it will ping your insurance. If there's about 1/3 of the time, there's no prior authorization. And then 2/3 of the time, there's roughly a prior auth. The prior auth generally says, in all of your cases, have you tried the other injectable insulin? And the answer obviously is yes. And that's generally the main PA question. Then they want to know, did you do a lung function test? And are you struggling with your control? And that's really, are you having lows at night or lows during the day or other reasons that the insurance company, wants to cover the product? You have to remember, Lilly and Novo give really deep discounts to insurance companies to block any other competition. And so I don't like that about the healthcare system, but that is the nature of the healthcare system. And so, CVS and ESI are paid billions of dollars on insulin a year, and they, get much lower cost. And when you think about your insurance, you're paying 20% of cost share of WAC price. That WAC price is artificially inflated, and you're getting penalized with cost shares that you shouldn't be. But that's the nature of insurance, right? There's cheaper insulin available, and you do not see that being dispensed consistently to give you the lower cost share. It's one of my frustrations of the insurance system. But so when we talk to them, we try to educate them that we're the only alternative for people living with type 1 diabetes, and half of our patients on Afrezza are type 1 and half of them are type 2. So we really split right down the middle, and it's an important aspect. And so generally the PA will get approved within a day or two. You just got to make sure your doctor or their office submit it, and generally it's not a problem. And about 20% of the people, may be a little bit more challenging. And in those scenarios, like I just had somebody who was a physician who wanted to go on it, and he got the PA, and he goes, "Well, I'm not failing." He said, "My A1C is a 6.1. I said, "Well, then why should the insurance company pay a premium, right? You really got to think about, in their eyes, if you can control yourself on, cheaper insulin, great. But if you can't, that's the justification for this." But in the event you are having trouble with the insurance, we will give it to you for 4 months for free if you're commercial insurance, if you're Medicaid, Medicare also. And then after that, we either usually get it approved by month 3 at the latest. And there's a subset of people that just may not get coverage, or they just don't cover it no matter what you do. And so we have a cash program, and that's $99 to $199 a box. So that's through Eagle Pharmacy down in Florida, and that you can go to the website and sign up there. It's insulinsavings.com. And, we stuck back 2 years ago when all the insulin pricing debate was happening. We said, what is a fair price of insulin? And we said $3 to $5 a day. And that's how we feel comfortable with that. We don't make any money on it at that price. But we think consumers who have to pay cash out of pocket should not be sharing insulin, and that we really want to do everything we can. And really, first we'll fight the insurance. But if we really get to the end, or Medicare, we try to make sure it's affordable as best we can. International request, if you have anyone international listening in, or they're interested in Afrezza, we do have patients in England and Australia and Germany. They're actually, you'd be surprised, the government actually pays for it, and they import it through our third party. It's all legit and registered, and import it and appropriate forms and shipping and everything. So you have to fight sometimes. I know England has good 5 or 10 patients probably now, and NICE is paying for it. So that gives you some color there.
How about Canada?
Canada, we also have some patients in Canada. A lot of times they'll get the cash program, honestly, and come across the border and then just drive back and get it. But it's actually more expensive to buy it through our program, unfortunately, on the international, than to just come over here and pick it up, because there's so much. You'd be surprised. I think like Mexico is like a $700 import tax, and I'm like, God, that's crazy. So when we talk about, we can all get into politics and import, but other countries jack up the price of our imports, and it makes it almost unaffordable to bring in drugs to other countries, unless you're getting an FDA, the equivalent of the FDA approval in that country, and get it covered by the state. It's hard to ship a drug, and with all the import taxes and registration they charge. And then anybody that has commercial insurance, meaning you're not on Medicaid or Medicare, basically, there's a copay card on Afrezza.com/savings, and that takes it down to $15. So no one should be paying more than $15 that has commercial insurance. That's kind of my view in the world. And if you are, it means the PA probably didn't get approved, and you just got to get the PA done. Okay.
So just as a reminder, this is an amazingly creative group. So someone suggested that perhaps you put Braille dots on the cartridges so that you could feel what they are. Just a thought. And since one of our members just over the last weekend ended up in a well-regarded hospital with DKA, and they pulled her pump, they pulled everything. Are you having any luck with inroads into hospitals that would immediately bring down blood sugars in DKA?
That's a study Kevin and I have been talking about since he joined. And we have doctors who've used it in, especially New York City, where, it's just crowded, especially with COVID these days. And they'll have the patient sit in the office. They'll give them a sample in the office, and they'll bring their sugars down from 550, 600, down to 300. They'll say, sit here for an hour. This doesn't work. We're sending you to the hospital. And an hour later, because if you drove to the hospital and sat in ER, you'd be 2 hours. So we have seen that happen within physician offices, and we've talked to places like Kaiser to figure out how we do this within like a Kaiser healthcare system. But it makes sense that when you're heading in the hospital and you're sitting there in the ER and intake, that they just give you a quick dose of this and start to bring your sugars down. By the time you get an IV drip going, it's unfortunate. It takes a while. So yeah, that's something we are looking at. So future areas for us are gestational diabetes, surgeries, hospitals, things like this, discharge protocols for hypoglycemia. We think these are all very unique populations that we can help.
So you mentioned it. So COVID question came up: if we're regularly using Afrezza and then get COVID, can it affect how we recover?
I know we've had one of our own employees who got COVID as type 1 on Afrezza, and she just pushed through it and was able to successfully get over the hump and never came off her Afrezza, did fine. It's obviously an anecdotal of one that I can give you. So just, if you're sick, like anything, people ask like, what if I have an infection outside of COVID, just in general, lung infection? You get your insulin absorbed just like you get nicotine on your lungs when you smoke. Your lungs are covered in tar and they still get nicotine. You still get your Afrezza when you have an upper respiratory infection. You shouldn't come off it. But when you are sick, your sugar levels are all over the place. You're feeling like crap. And, that's just the nature of the beast, as you may need more insulin in general. But I leave that to you and your physician judgment. Do you come off and wait till you're over the COVID hump and go back, or do you stick through it because, tight controls and your control in general is important with people living with diabetes and COVID. So I don't think 10 days is going to hurt anybody coming off inhaled insulin if they have to. Getting over COVID is way more important than trying to fight through something if you're having irritation. But you'll get your absorption, I think, is the bottom line there.
That's great.
But COVID's tough. We have a lot of people with it right now, so I don't want to minimize it. Okay. Any questions on reimbursement or challenges there? If any of you have been on Afrezza and you were filling it, we used to have you would just go to the pharmacy and pay $15, and you may not even have known if you had the PA done or not. That program did end at the end of this year. So if you go for a refill in the new year, you may notice a hiccup. And if you do, we'll get it covered through Afrezza Assist, and we'll just make sure we route the PA, and then you'll get the free drug if you need it. So if you have any, email me or just talk to your doctor and just make sure the PA submit it, and then we'll get you free drug if you need it.
Are you doing anything in terms of advocacy to kind of block the people that block you?
So, unfortunately, it's no one who is going to need liability, right? They're the ones who contract and say, we'll give you 60, 70% off for, 95% market share. And so that is a challenge. JDRF and the National Education Organization and others have written to Congress and some of the payers saying, hey, you need to cover all insulins and make options available for people living with type 1 especially. And so now what's happening is you're seeing the state caps on insurance say you're not going to pay more than $35 or $50 if you're covered. Now what the insurance companies are doing is saying, well, we're not covering anything but this one insulin, and therefore only that one's capped. And so now you don't have access. So now we got to think about how do you advocate for coverage of all insulins, right? Or all forms at least. But that's, it's a cat and mouse game. You knock the whack-a-mole. You knock down one hole and another loop comes up. But we're looking at creative things that will really solve this problem. But demand solves all problems. So if there's enough patients demanding Afrezza, I promise you insurance companies will start covering it with less restrictions. But if people aren't demanding it, then they say, why should I waste my time? They're busy. And so that's a lot of what you see. And Dexcom's a great example, right? 5 years ago, everybody struggled getting coverage, and now you can go to your pharmacy and pick it up with a copay. So as your volume grows, these problems solve themselves at the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you do any kind of marketing campaign aimed at using Afrezza as a rescue for just random and stubborn highs? Because that's what I tell everyone in my groups is just have it for when you need it.
Yes.
That I don't think people even think that way.
Yeah, no, that's why we have the cash program. If you just go to buy one box, get a prescription and buy one box. It's not the end of the world. We all have, I understand, income's always tight, but we all could find $100 for something we need and use. So there's nothing worse than being high for 2-3 hours. And you'll see we improve, a couple hours a day, 2 to 5 hours a day, daytime, time and range. So, really think about what your day is like. It's like my wife works for Amgen and migraine. And, hearing about a migraine sufferer is the worst thing in the world, right? And you'd spend anything to get out of the pain of that. So, and you guys have to deal with this every day. So I don't want to ever minimize what that's like.
So there was just a question about about getting a PA with a low A1C, and one of the issues to raise is reduced risk for hypoglycemia. And Mike's going to speak to that now a little bit more. So, but when you speak with your doctor, reducing your risk for hypoglycemia. So you're treating your highs, but you have less risk for having subsequent lows.
Yep. Okay. All right, so I'm going to keep pushing along here, Joanne, and feel free to chime in as other questions pop up. So hopefully it's been valuable to everybody so far, and I see at least the Zoom parts, and we'll see who else is on Facebook listening here. So this is the BluHale, and so this is what we're working on. And here on the right side, you can see where we're going. I'll start to show you, did I take a 4, 8, or 12? So maybe I guess in the future, to your point, if you had your iPhone open and you were sleeping, you would just in the dark, you could take this one. I'll show you if you took a 4 and 8 right there. But that's something we'll continue to look at, and I like the idea of putting a little bump on the side, and you can feel 1 or 2. That may be the best way to think about this. So we'll talk to our engineering team about that. But here you can start to see a CGM. We looked at a Dexcom patient works for us, and every time they took a dose, you see the 2-hour, we call them plunge plots. Your sugars just go down, and that's something that anyone living with type 1 is not used to. Their sugars going down in the first half hour, an hour, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, am I going low? No, pretty much at the base of 30 minutes, your sugars will smooth out and you'll go forward, and you'll start to see that when you dose on CGM. And again, we looked at this by days. We'll start cutting the data different ways, but you can just see if you took 4, 8, or 12, or 16, you took 2 8s, for example. But pretty much within 2 hours, your sugars are going to come down on Afrezza. I'm not going to go into data in terms of real deep clinical data, but I'll just tell you, last year we had over 20 publications and presentations. And so it was a pretty busy year on the medical front. Everything from the safety, the long-term, the original toxicology data on rodents and animals, everything has been published in the lungs. In fact, we've shown that if you're really worried about lung function, getting A1C down and lowering your BMI, diabetes and sugars attack your lungs just like every other organ. So that's something we've seen in our trials is, we don't tell you to check your lungs, but we check your eyes, your feet, your liver, your kidney. We're looking at all the other organs. The lungs also lose elasticity and capacity as you age and as you have high sugars. So that's something to keep in mind. So now I'm going to jump into some of the looping studies. And again, these are third-party studies done by experts. These are not MannKind. We may have supplied drug or something, but they're not things that we're endorsing. I just want to be very clear about that. So this first one was Howard Zisser, and this was published back in 2015. And if you know him, he's a very popular person. And I sent these studies to Joanne, so she has them. And clinical results of an automated artificial pancreas. And what he was trying to show is that maybe if you prime the loop system earlier, that you could get a faster control. And that's really what he was trying to focus on. So this one was really around getting a little bit more insulin on board ahead of time, so that when the loop kicks in an hour later, you're going. And you can see adding preprandial, we call it technosphere insulin, that's TI, to an automated closed loop resulted in superior postprandial control demonstrated by lower glucose exposure without additional hypo risk. And that's consistent with seeing all of our trials, whether it's type 2s adding insulin or type 1s, we're reducing hypo when you switch. So he looked at giving a priming dose, I'll call it, a very different way. And you can see here is the, your faces are covering up my slide. You can see the shift to the left in glucose control and TI, which is in the blue, versus no TI in the red. And I think these are different percentiles. So again, looking at the difference here, you do get a glucose curve shift to the left. And again, this is data that's out there. This is a study just came out recently and published in September. And this was with Yale and Etta Sanjiza, who I know, and there's a couple other people there. And what Etta was using was I think a hacked pump system. Kevin's probably a little bit closer on an expert this than me and can fill in my gaps or my lack of communication here on this one. But what we saw was low dose and high dose of Afrezza. And I'll show you some slides on this in a little more detail, but I wanted to show you from the publication. And what I would say is what we thought is low dose of Afrezza would be like a 1-to-1. And their model in the study was a 0.9 average to 1. So they went even lower than your injectable dose per meal. And the high dose was 1.2. And we don't even think that's a high dose of Afrezza. And this study was done 3 years ago when we thought Afrezza was more of a 1-to-1 ratio when it got approved. And since then, we've reanalyzed all of our data, and we see it's about a 1.5 to 2 units of insulin per injectable. But you can see the high dose. You can see, generally a really fast uptake on the start of the meal from your serum insulin, comes down in about 60 minutes, like we saw in the other papers. And that your basal, when you gave a higher dose, your basal rate didn't change as much. When you underdosed, your basal rate kicked up a little bit in the early stage. And that to me shows you were underdosing right early. And you can see, because you didn't give a proper, you're asking me for 2-unit cartridges, for example. If you'd given a more effective dose on Afrezza, you wouldn't have seen the escape 2 hours later. And because you see that you don't rise really for the first 60 to 90 minutes. It's after Afrezza is done, you didn't dose it enough, and that's why you got that rise. Had you dosed it properly, you would have shut down that liver, you would have been really stable longer, and you wouldn't have seen that latent rise in sugar. So this is, to me, high dose was really an average dose, I'll call it, and low dose was really underdosed, and you can see that from these results. But the conclusion here is pre-meal bolus reduced early glycemic excursion and improved, and this was in the high, not the low, and improved post-prendial control during HCL compared to aspart bolus. The improvements was not sustained after the end of the glycemic action of Afrezza in about 2 hours. So, and we think if you had dosed higher, you would have seen a more sustained action. And that's something that, we're not going to criticize the study, but that's really the insight I want you guys to have from the study. And I'm going to come back to that and present that data in more detail, but I want to give you a quick high level of the 2 studies that came out. And this is when we look at the speed of action of mealtime. You've gone from human insulin to sub-Q acting analog insulin to the modified and to ultra rapid, which really is where we think Afrezza is. That's something that works in a few minutes and it's out of the body within 60 to 90. We recommend that an ultra rapid category really is not just about the onset and how fast it works, but the offset activity, because that's really the challenge that a lot of patients are struggling with. And this just goes to show you a 4-unit cartridge. So I told you guys I would show you this data, and you can see a 4-unit peaks in about 10 minutes. They all come in about the same, but it's about 35 minutes and about an hour and a half. It's pretty much done. It doesn't really have any activity after the 45 minutes or 35 minutes in the body. And you can see a 12-unit just gives you a higher control. So back to my comment earlier about the mealtime appearance of food and sugar, you're just trying to cover your meal. And so if you're having a bigger meal, you just want to take more insulin. You're having a smaller meal, you just want a snack, you just want a lower dose. That's what you're really trying to do. If you needed more insulin 2 hours later, you can take another dose, and I'll show you that data in a second. This was the endogenous glucose suppression data I talked about, where we get into the liver, and you can see, getting a real dose of Afrezza in the body very quickly really shuts down that hepatic glucose production pretty quickly in the first 15, 20 minutes. So here was the original study that was the 171 was our type 1 study. So the first 12 weeks, they could titrate their dose, and then after that, they were fixed. And, I didn't design this study. It's kind of a weird design, but they optimized for 4 weeks, and then they switched over in a 1-to-1 ratio. And the reason that's important is you optimized everybody on the control of injectable insulin, but then you switch over to a different profile of insulin, and then you're not retitrating them. You're starting the study, and all of a sudden we underdose people right away. And it took them 12 weeks to titrate back up to where they probably should have been day 1. And so despite all that, we did get a similar glucose control, and this was a non-inferiority trial. So the goal here was not to be better than the standard of care. The goal here was to be the same. And that's what you saw here. But we didn't know at this time is when you looked at the dosing at 12 weeks, the patient basically got to about a 1.5 ratio to injectable. And the basal insulin, that's another thing to think about if you ever do switch. Depending on which basal insulin you need, your basal may need to be up by 15, 20%. If it's Tresiba, it's got a little bit longer tail, maybe it's a little lower. But, just make sure you don't forget about your basal when you're starting to think about a basal bolus regimen if you go back to injectable 1 shot a day with an inhaled. This was the fasting that I talked about earlier. As you can see, the purple Afrezza versus the orange. Our fastings are usually 20, 30 points lower in all of our trials. We think we have 5 trials now showing this. And I used to get yelled at by your doctor saying, Mike, you can't say that a mealtime insulin also lowers fasting. And I kept saying, well, why do our studies keep showing this? There's a trend there for one reason or another, and we haven't quite figured it out, but it's something that we know, and I'll show you. I think it's just more effective dosing gives you better control. And this was a simulator study that was done back in 2015 that was the precursor of me doing a study. So we ran this study and said, had you dosed Afrezza properly, you would have had better glycemic control with less hypoglycemia. And so no one thought of Afrezza being better than the standard of care. So we went ahead and did a study. And I worked with Satish and Ann Peters and Bruce Bodie, who are some of the world-renowned endocrinologists on this study. And we just said, let's do a real-world study over 28 days. So every meal, every day for 28 days, we used Afrezza versus the standard of care of analog insulin aspart. And you can see what happened here. We gave you a 1-to-1 conversion because that's, again, what we thought the dosing was at the time. And that's where it converted you. And then we said in 1 hour, if you're 150 to 200, take another 4. If you're above 200, take an 8. So this, again, was the instructions we used for this trial. And the only goal of this trial was to show if you gave proper dosing of Afrezza, you would get a better postprandial control with less hypo. That was the goal of the study. Unfortunately, one of the docs did not believe that you could dose insulin in 1 hour because you were going to stack it. We checked, trying to explain to them that's not likely. And so they did not follow the protocol. And because of that, we had to analyze the data with all comers and separate it out. And so this is what happens on Dexcom when you follow our overall study results. Aspart, as I showed you earlier, your sugars are generally going to go up in the first hour, and then they start to come down. And these are statistically better postprandial controls in the first 2 hours. It's about 45 milligrams per deciliter between the gray line and the magenta line. And so all that is better A1C control. And when people tell me I'm worried about going low, yes, you can go low. But I also remind you in the first hour, we got to like 145. We still had another 75 points to drop before I started getting nervous here. And so you can see, you never really see your sugars drop in the first hour. You do see that. And then if you dosed, even if you gave a follow-up dose at 1 hour, you still didn't see people continue to drop. They kind of got back to their postprandial 4-hour control. So back to that study I showed you from Yale, at 1 hour, if you were given if you underdosed in the beginning, just give yourself another dose as soon as 1 hour, and you will be able to keep that tight control you're looking for. Or you can give a higher dose in the beginning and just see where you are in an hour. And if you're fine, you're fine. If you're not, again, you can take another dose. So this really gives you that control that you're looking for. Here was all comers that followed our protocol. So I call them compliant. And so had you followed the protocol, you can see an even more distinct profile between this line and this line. So that's about 65 milligrams per deciliter. And if you think about that, that's about a 1% A1C reduction. And all you did was switch your insulin from injectable to inhaled. You didn't add any other drugs, any other copays. You just switched your insulin from one to another. So then I show you what happens for those that did not follow the dosing protocol. And what you see here is, again, a good 4-hour postprandial control, which is what you're looking for, just like this one. The 0 to 4 hours was the same. The difference was your baseline, back to that fasting comment I made earlier, you came in pre-meal about 30 points higher. So properly dosing your Afrezza brings your overall glycemic burden down, probably because you're just crushing those highs. We got a study results coming out very shortly, 75% reduction, I think it was, maybe 80 above 250. We just crushed the highs right away with Afrezza. And I think that's really important. Okay. Then, and this is really the first time you've ever seen a head-to-head insulin beat another insulin. In general, 100 years later, we generally show you they're the same at meal. One may have a 30-minute administration, one has a 15, but there is no clinical difference in terms of mealtime control, including the newer ones that just came out. Here we are showing you head-to-head against Aspart. Afrezza has better breakfast and better lunch, and people did not dose appropriately at dinner because you're always afraid of nocturnal hypoglycemia or you snack. We get that. So the next study we do, I guarantee you, we will make sure we nail dinner, because that's another 10 hours of time in range that we think we missed. Had we been able to get this dinner dose properly, we would have not gone high at night in the study. We're looking at daytime time in range now in this data in terms of daytime less than 70 and some other aspects versus nighttime to see, do you impact nocturnal hypoglycemia with that latent tail or not? You got 2 hours better time in range. So again, following our dosing protocol got you 2 hours better time in range, which we know is clinically significant. If you didn't follow our dosing protocol, you were no worse than switching from your injectable to an inhaled. So that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario, you're the same. Best case scenario, you improve your control. So you really have that control and that choice. And then here's what's most important to everyone here is the hypoglycemia. So what happened when I gave a lot more Afrezza over my inhaled, either injectable or I didn't follow the dosing protocol. So here, on Aspart, you were about 55 minutes a day, less than 70. Here, you almost doubled your dose of Afrezza in the compliant arm. And you can see you still had time less than 70 was cut almost in half, and less than 3 minutes a day for less than 50. So glucagon cannot bring you back that fast or a lifesaver. We are generally, when you're going low on Afrezza, you're not there for hours, you're there for minutes. And, you're going to come back up within a few minutes, and you have that safety margin to really think about. I will say all insulins are hard to manage, and all insulins can cause hypo. I'm not here to say that it's not a risk. I'm just saying that, it's a risk that you can manage, and, it's just reduced relative to the injectable insulins. Any questions on the stat study I just talked about?
We're good.
Okay.
There was a question about dosing when you start a meal at 80. There's a lot of chatter going on. Well, I wouldn't even take it at 80. And a lot of loopers are between 80 and 120.
So I've sat with people who are right at 100 or 80, and they're about to eat, had a guy eat bacon and eggs and a big pizza. And they just say, look, in an hour, I know I'm going to be fine. You're dosing your insulin properly. you know what's going to happen. You're going to control that meal. And so that's the goal, right? You want to be between 80 and 120 and keep that sugar flat as possible. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's, if I go back a second, right, it's a great question. Look here, let's say you brought your glycemic profile down, right? Even this one, you came down to 155 and you dosed, you went down to 145, 10 points on average in your meal. So again, what you're trying to do is dose and cover that meal with what you're about to eat and get your proper dosing. So yes, I can understand the nervousness. I've taken Afrezza myself. I know exactly what you're feeling. But the reality is, that's what your body does. Your body releases insulin as soon as you eat and you're covering that meal. That's what you want to do and keep your sugars tight. And so, I encourage you to try it, right? And just watch it for an hour and, know what's going to happen. And you're going to find out yourself, right? Do you follow this curve or do you follow a steeper curve? And, what I say is don't take it 15 minutes before you eat if you're at 80, because you will drop. But if you know you're eating, that's the goal here. Okay.
So there are just some questions having to do with the actual meal and also exercise. Do these meals, are they all very standard?
This was a real-world trial. We didn't control for any food, any basal. There's no basal adjustments in this study. This was purely switching your mealtime insulin, a real-world trial. So
someone could be purely protein and someone could be 50-50 protein and carb and come up with the same results.
So yes, because again, you're just trying to, so hypothetically, what I will say in this study is that the doctor, I know I won't mention their name, but this doctor in particular who did not follow the protocol said exactly what you said. My patients are lean, they're following low carb diets, they're really restrictive, they're so OCD. And I looked at the data and I said, your patients are coming in at 185 and our patients at those probably were coming in at 155. So you still had 110 points to drop before we're in any danger zone here. And that was the exact objection that, this doctor gave me during the results. And now he or she does dose Afrezza appropriately now because they've seen their own study results in those patients.
If you're an exerciser or have increased lung capacity, do you absorb better in any way, or does it account for anything?
No, I mean, I would say we have a lot of triathletes and high performance people on Afrezza doing great. So they're you've seen them online. So we don't see a better absorption or less absorption because you're an athlete. I'm sure you're chewing up more insulin because you're more active, but that's a different issue. I don't know, Kevin. Anything you want to correct or anything you want to add? Feel free.
No, I mean the insulin gets in right away, so it's not based on the number of breaths you take. It is basically just getting down into the lung within that first half second and absorbing from there. So I don't think you'll see a big difference there. Of course, you'll be more sensitive to insulin because that's what we see with athletes. So that would be typical. So we're not going to be concerned about that. But, like everything else, it's going to be titrating to effect. And Michael's giving you a great overview about how you can use the therapy. But everyone on this talk tonight, obviously, you guys are all super users and you have already, you're making adjustments above and beyond what the typical patient with diabetes does. So you'll certainly be able to understand and evaluate how this therapy would work with you in your course of action.
So I'll keep pushing along here and we'll continue the dialogue. So this is the Yale study I mentioned earlier. I showed you a glimpse of in the publication, but these are the slides that were actually presented at ADA, I think in 2020, if I recall. I'm sorry, ATTD last year. So pre-meal bolus, we know fail to mimic first phase insulin response. That's essential to control. And strategies aimed at slowing down carbohydrate absorption, accelerating insulin have investigated to overcome these barriers, but not a lot of outcomes we've seen that worked well. But ultra fast insulin is something that they wanted to look at here, and we provide a free drug. JDRF helped sponsor it, and so we're trying to show the efficacy and safety of Afrezza versus pre-meal bolus in controlling post-meal in the HCL system. And the hypothesis was that Afrezza given will limit the magnitude and rate of rise. Following a meal will be safe during HCL treatment. And again, this study was started probably in 2017, and we were doing one-to-one dosing back then. And even the stat study I just showed you, if we did that study again today, we would use about a 1.5 to 2 conversion, and you wouldn't have as many of those follow-up doses there. 18 to 30 years old, open label, 3 meal visits, 2 meals during each visit, breakfast and lunch. And you can see the HCL control was the baseline, then Afrezza high dose and low dose, and then you just switched over to high and it switched over to low. So it was a self-control across all 3 of these. And they admitted the night before for the meal study and made sure they got new insertion and infusion sites. So all that stuff was standardized. And no big difference in those who were randomized and analyzed in terms of baseline characteristics. A1Cs were 7.3, so pretty decent control, and nothing else there. So what you saw here was time in range on the control was 83, 80, and 84, and that within 30 minutes of a meal, obviously statistically better post-meal control. But then after that, you lose that benefit, pretty much no difference, I'll say, and then maybe slightly worse as you get to the 2 and 3 hour range. But again, we underdosed Afrezza early on. And that's one of the things I was looking at is did the loop shut off the basal, and then the basal rate decreased, and then that caused the late and high. But the systems are not built for the speed of action of Afrezza. And that's been one of the challenges when we've talked to other third parties around how do you, even when you announce 4 units of Afrezza, it's got a very different action profile than a 4-unit injectable insulin. So, how do we start to get the loops to identify Afrezza specifically versus injectable insulin in that profile? And I think you guys had Rayhan here, and that's someone we've talked to around how do we think about that things. And now Kevin joining us. Kevin's a world leader in the pediatric endocrinology space and big user in the insulin pump space. And so we're trying to figure out how do we best figure this out, right? It's not an easy answer because how do you study when to dose it, how much to dose in a closed loop system? And if you're substituting it for your mealtime, that's one thing. If you're trying to supplement, it's a different one. And so that's hard to study in a well-controlled way. And here's what you saw in the low dose, Afrezza in the first 30, 40 minutes, it got great control, but then it's done its job. And that's my point to everybody. When you ask me for a 2-unit cartridge, it's going to work for about 20 minutes and be done. So I'm not sure what a 2-unit cartridge in the HCL is really going to do, because it's you see the results here in a system, which is a 0.9. So call it, 3.5 units of an inject, it was a 4-unit cartridge, but the average conversion from what they were taking was a 0.9. And so you just didn't see that control even at a 1-to-1. And then when you went up 20% on your insulin, again, you got a little bit better control out to 60 minutes, but then you started to rise. And so this is all, again, 150, went down to 125, coming back up. But that first 20, 30 minutes, you're coming down, and then you start to kick back in. So again, you just want that real-time control, and you want to stop that postprandial rise and cover your meal. And that's what you're trying to do in these first 2 hours. So if you don't dose your Afrezza properly, you're just not going to cover your meal. And that's really what this is all about, is just trying to cover that meal with your insulin. And you can see injectable insulin doesn't start working and then finally kicks in 2 hours later. And then that's why you're going low. And if you could see here, you were 175 going all the way down to probably 80 or 90. That's an 85 point drop here, right? And then your basal's kicking in, your basal rate, I'm sure. And then here was lunch. And you did see a better profile at lunch here in the first hour, and a little less of a rise later. So that was in the high study. Nothing, so when you look at hypo, again, low dose and high dose, proof that we underdosed these patients. No one really got less than 70. And the control, you can see a little bit of percent, but 3% less than 70 obviously is reasonable within the expectations. But you could have added more Afrezza and probably not seen that increased risk that you're looking at. So the conclusion was we do blunt the 30-minute values and better post-meal control, but it's not sustained. And that's one of the things we have is, so when we think about 2 units, my guess is we would show you how to underdose Afrezza even more, as we did this with 4 units and didn't really see that effect be enough. And so we really need to probably use more than 4, not go backwards to 2. And I don't know if that helps you or you believe me, but only your own experience will prove that out. And I'm not going to say this is an easy black and white answer, because it's not. Everyone reacts to insulin differently, and everyone's foods differently, and their activities different. So this is just one study in a younger population trying to show you what happened. So let me just, since we're on the hypo topic real quick, I'll just flip through a couple slides here. So this was our type 1 study, and you can see overall hypos were reduced about 30%, and then severe hypos were reduced by 43%. And remember, the severe hypos in this trial were needing assistance. These were pretty knocked out. And you can see, reducing the number one, risk of death in living with diabetes is important. And for me, severes is something to always watch out for. And if you can reduce that by 43%, that's huge. Type 2s, we added Afrezza on top of orals, and you didn't see a statistical difference when you're adding mealtime insulin on the type 2 on top of orals, which we think is excellent safety profile. And then overall hypo slightly increased, but again, we're adding insulin that people never took insulin. So that's what that study was, but no, again, significant. It was statistically significant, but no, huge increase in overall hypo. This is an important slide. So these are type 1. We look at the hypo rates in the 0 to 2 hours when Afrezza is on board and injectable, and then you look at the 2 to 4 hours. So the light area is the first 2 hours of insulin activity between inhaled and injected. And then you see the 2 to 5 hours of Afrezza. And that's where you see the extra hypoglycemia happening, is that latent hypos. And again, this study was done on analog insulin and injectable MDI. But that tail of insulin is what's catching you here. And one of the lead people in hypoglycemia is Betsy Sequest. And she published a second study recently showing you level 1 less than 70 was about 30% lower. Level 2 was about 38% lower. And then this one also. So, you really are seeing, this is a head-to-head trial in our pivotal study. And, a lot of pushback, people said, well, you just gave less Afrezza, and that's why you had less hypo. And that's why we did the second analysis controlling for A1C, dosing of insulin, and you see hands down, we still have lower hypo no matter which way you want to cut the data. So we feel pretty good about this safety aspects of the product when it comes to hypoglycemia. And it really goes back to this tail. I'm not going to say you can't go low, you obviously can, but the severity of the lows are very different. And we talked about the STAT study. So I'm going to quickly go through weight. Injectable insulin, you generally have more weight gain. So you see about a 1.3 kilogram difference between Afrezza and the comparator. And in type 2s against placebo, you gained about a half a kilo. But when I did this against basal bolus, it's about a 3 to 4 pound difference in type 2s that you gain more on injectable. Type 1 patients, here was the cough. 1 out of 3 people, or 30% roughly, got cough. And what I like to show people is that cough, started in the first week and pretty much goes down to week 4. And you can see 3% of people discontinue for cough, but 97% of people generally got resolved. And that's important. And lung function test. So you're supposed to take a baseline lung function test. The average person on this little device will blow about a 3.1 liter. Your lungs have 6 liters of capacity. So in 1 second, you're generally going to blow 2.5 to 3.1, depending on your age. And as you get older, obviously you expect to blow less, and there's corrections for that. But you're really just looking for a change over 6 months and a year and a half. So at 6 months, you just do it again. And generally you see most people aren't changing. 18 months, again, no big change. And so this is one of the things that everyone asks them, if it's not real changing, why am I doing it? Well, you are looking for a 20% decline. And in our trials, you have to zoom in 1,000-fold to look at this scale of a normal lung, what you're going to do. And you saw a 40 ml difference between us and the standard of care. And notice what I talked about earlier, your lung function is going down just by living with diabetes. And then you see a non-progressive decline. In other words, in the first 3 months, just adding inhaled insulin just causes this. We've seen this in probably 10,000 patients between Exubera and our studies. And so we don't have an explanation. There is nothing there. It's non-progressive. You don't get worse. And when you stop this Afrezza, it goes back to the baseline. So it goes back to the control group. So if you were to discontinue, you generally go back to where you're trending if you weren't on Afrezza. So it looks like it's a temporary transient, but it is what it is. I couldn't explain to you. But I just, getting good sugar control is way more important in life. And 40 ml lung capacity difference is about the difference between 1 year of age. So, you lose about 35, 40 mLs a year. None of us notice we just lost 40 mLs a lung, but that's what your body is doing as you get older. But non-progressive, and I did want to describe that. So what you are looking for is a 20% decline from 3 liters, if that's what you blowed, which is 600 mLs. And you can see here, 600 mLs is 15 times greater than we saw in the clinical trials. And that happened in 2% of people versus 1% of people in the placebo, or control arm, I'll say. So it's not something that happens a lot. And that's what you're looking for to be if you're in that lucky 1%. And even then it says you could consider discontinuation. It's up to you and your provider. It does not mandate discontinuation. Okay. And then this is high density CT scannings. And so, this is where you'd be looking for pulmonary fibrosis or lung cancer or anything else, tumors. And you can see here Afrezza versus usual care versus the powder without insulin. You don't see any statistical changes, and unfortunately probably expose more people to cancer risk in CT scans than anything. So we don't see anything on the safety profile. And I think that's important to highlight to all of you and know that we've studied this more than Pfizer, and we can't seem to find anything that gives us any scares or safety signals. And my own family members take Afrezza. So that tells you I believe in our own product pretty well. So, okay. Some of this we hit on. I just want to talk about dosing again. You can see we went back and did analysis of 4 different trials in type 1s and see that it's a 1.4 to 1.8 ratio. And you can see your A1C change is about a 1.8 dosing to sub-Q. So if you want to maintain your A1C, That's about what we're looking at, is to increase your dose, not decrease your dose. When I get the questions for 2 units, I know the data would suggest we need probably higher, not lower doses, but I don't want to ignore what you guys are asking for. Okay. This is a study, probably one of the largest meal tolerance databases in the world, 525 patients at 1 year. And what you can see here is looking at A1C. In this particular meal tolerance test, we're trying to show you a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you took 2 units of aspart and 4 units of Afrezza, this is generally what your sugar profile is going to look like, right? You increase slightly over time, and then you come back down over the 6 hours. And what you see is as you increase your aspart dose, the latent sugar drop, I'll call it, not even hypo, but let's say you're at 10 units of aspart and 20 units of inhaled insulin. Here you can see meals being controlled. Your sugars rise for the first hour and a half, like we showed you before. Afrezza stops your postprandial rise, and then you get that latent escape. But what's happening here at 4 hours later, you're going down below your thing. So again, if you were at 80, to your point earlier, and you looked at Afrezza, you're not really going to get low. But on injectable insulin, you would go low in that time frame. You would drop 30, 40 points 3-4 hours later. So this is the nature of the meal tolerance test data that we have done, showing you 2-to-1 is safe and effective for Afrezza in this post hoc analysis. So dosing mealtime insulin is really what you're trying to do. That's really what you want to do, is cover your meal. And when you ask me what I dose at 80, I think here's a real world 500 patient meal tolerance test. You can see very few patients giving, from your baseline, you're not changing that much. And that's really what you want. Where if you wait, you're letting more sugar come out of your liver, more sugar come out of your body. You're not shutting down the liver, and then you're throwing off all the sugar that you got to control, and then you're going high. And that's really what's cascading this effect of what we're trying to achieve in life. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Question. The 4-unit, 8-unit, and 12-unit cartridges, is it just the 8-unit has twice as much powder, or is it more concentrated?
Nope. You can linear dose all the way up to 48 units. And so I always joke, if you really want that 6-hour tail, just take 48 units of Afrezza, you can get it. But so it's possible to get a longer profile. You just got to give a lot more insulin. So if you're going to have a really, really big meal, puff away. But the reality is it's linear, and we've seen this in microgram dosing in our other disease we're looking at. So it's a very unique technology that way. Not all dry powder inhalations have that additive approach. And it's insulin in general. The higher doses you go, you start to curve out, right? You have less effectiveness of injectable as you go higher and higher. And this is when people say, "Oh, my patients are very insulin resistant." Well, I'm sure that's true, but we also cover up all the insulin receptors and over basalize people, and there's a whole bunch of other things going on in the body that you're trying to find receptors to bind to. And so the more insulin you give, you just saturate those receptors at some point, and that's part of the problem.
Well, you've hit a lot of what we were asking, and the chatter is going on offline, but I would like to offer us our group if you want to do a study with loopers. And several of us would like you to do a study with us and ship us to New Orleans, where we eat beignets, and show you how it works.
We're going to do a real study, real world. Everyone's going to fly to Louisiana for a weekend, and we're going to, we're going to fill some 2-unit cartridges up. We'll bring the 4s and 8s, and we'll see what happens over a weekend. So be careful what you ask for. Kevin will be nervous, but we'll do a real world trial and enjoy some time out post-COVID.
Well, the comments are, "Well, just show up with 12-unit cartridges and have a good time." So, this is great. This has been so informative.
Yeah, and here's the last couple slides are just really real-world profiles of patients that have shared this with us and said we can use them. And so here was Kevin. You can see him on a pump, switched over to Afrezza, and the first thing you notice is his highs were gone. Obviously, he had some lows in his first week, but he figured it out. And then people say, "What happened after 2-3 years?" And this is Kevin after 3 years. You can see he's just using a basal and Afrezza, and 4 years now, he looks the same, right? Great guy. He's stuck in Russia right now because of COVID, and saying, "How can I get Afrezza over here?" So he's working on it. That's where we are there. Here's another patient, actually one of our employees. You can see, switched over from his insulin pump and done great. He's done great in the last 2 years. Continued to do well. You can see the CGMs; they don't lie. And then here was a person on Libre. People said, "Oh, I need Dexcom." No, you can use Libre; it's just as fine. We don't care what CGM you're on. We've done studies with both, and this particular patient I know personally said, "I'm trying to get 100% time in range for the day." And if you saw what he ate, you'd say, "Well, eating like Chinese food and pigging out is not going to help you." But he just took a ton of Afrezza, and he finally got there one day, and he's really happy. So he sent this to us. And this was a person, young kid, not in control for a long time and kind of carefree and doesn't want diabetes to control his life. And he's doing great now. There, and this is one of your colleagues. I won't mention his name because I know you know him. He may have shown you this data himself in one of your talks in the past. But here he eats a burrito bowl. He's a physician, gets done late at night, takes his 10 units of insulin, and he's like, "Thank God I was sleeping because I would have had a rage bolus and probably going low." And 5-6 hours later, here he is finally getting back. Ate the same meal, took 8 units of Afrezza, and you can see right back down in 3 hours. And so he's like, "Thank God I took it during the day and it was fine." But this is the drug works fast, right? It doesn't take 6 hours to start kicking in. And that's just really what I had to share, Joanna. And hopefully you guys have found this informative. And I spent a little bit of time here, but nothing more important to me than help and educate the society around insulin that you take every day for your entire life. And so hopefully I give you a little bit of a different perspective, challenge some of the norms that you're thinking and hearing out there. But good news is MannKind's here for the next 20 years that I can see, and the Afrezza is not going anywhere. And we will be the only inhaled insulin on the market. I predict we'll be the only innovative insulin coming out in the next 2 decades. And so when doctors tell me they can't get over the inhaled aspects of it, then I say, well, then I don't know how you're going to get good mealtime control. We really got to learn how to use the tools we have, and whatever gets you in control, I'm happy for each of you. And that's all I hope for society, is that we all get better control, because 8 out of 10 people aren't in control. And working at Amgen, I had 300,000 people in dialysis. I'd see ship Evogen 2 each week, and that's not fun. So really do everything you can to help your friends and help yourselves. And it's tiresome, and we just try to take a little bit of that burden off you and everything we're doing here with Afrezza.
So when can we get the BluHale Pro?
We are going through all the regulatory pathway, and so some of that will be on the FDA, and we just hired Kevin and our new head of regulatory. So we're just going through which pathway we think this can go, and is it going to be required for an FDA approval, or what's going to be required. So we are going through all those motions as we speak. So
if you need to do studies on people, use us too. Personal question, are you both type 1?
I am not type 1. I am probably more leaning towards type 2, unfortunately. But
sorry to hear that. This is the comments are flying back. This has been so informative. Love your sense of humor and your kindness. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is really important that our community pays attention to this. It's the only thing different right now.
It's it. And I hate to be, I'm not a pessimistic person. I just know drug development, drug research. I've done it a long time, and people are walking away from diabetes, right? We're going to have a lot of device innovation, a lot of algorithms. I see that being strong. But in terms of true new therapeutic options, with the SGLT2s not making it in the type 1 space, that just crushed a lot of hope. And doesn't mean you give up, because that would be human nature. But it's just very, very expensive. And the PBMs are just driving down the cost dramatically, which is good. Unfortunately, that cost is not getting passed on to patients, right? It's just these high prices are coming in, and you're giving huge discounts, and it's not, the whole healthcare system is just one big mess in my mind. And I was never more disappointed when I saw Amazon and Berkshire and these guys give up on their new healthcare model. That was really depressing, because that's my goal in life, is to change healthcare.
Yep.
And so it's a hard system. It's complex. I wish I could make it easy, but we'll do our little part here in diabetes.
We're having a lot of the newer closed loop manufacturers come talk to us about what's coming, and none of them meet the numbers that we're able to do on Loop. And it's very disturbing, because we could see possibly Loop might not be available for us. But if we had this tool, we might be able to mitigate the inability to set our own targets,
right?
Which might help a whole lot.
Yeah, because they're going to program these systems to be at a level 7 A1C, because they don't want you to go low, because then it's a safety issue and they will never get approved, right? And that's the problem with injectable insulin. To really push yourself hard and get the 6s consistently, you're going to be pushing lows, and that's the balance you're trying to make, unfortunately. And I just say, it's this parameter, and I just feel very comfortable that our insulin will give you that benefit you're looking for in terms of control and safety, and that's always the seesaw here you're dealing with.
The challenge with these new systems remains mealtime control. So, everyone agrees that they've done a really nice job of dealing with, basal control and even doing some correcting, but mealtime control remains the issue. And everyone talks about needing a faster acting insulin. And there is one on the market. It's Afrezza. And Mike showed you the data. And I think that's really the challenge, because you hear all the time, we need faster insulin. And this one is very fast, but it's just not been incorporated yet into some of these systems. So just throw it out there.
My gosh, thank you. Really appreciate the generosity of your time. There's a lot of buzz going on here. So we'll be sure to share
the longest Zoom meeting I've done during COVID. So I hope it was valuable and worth your time. And I don't mind doing it. I don't have my kids tonight, so no one's missing me.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Have a very, very safe week. We appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you for having us, and Happy New Year, and stay safe.
Thank you.